Welcome back. So this is a video on the observations of later castles and palaces in the medieval and into the Renaissance period. So let's get going on that. Alright, so this first castle in Germany called Eltz Castle. Now there's a couple of things that I was hoping in particular that you would notice about this one. First, I'll start with some of the similarities that we see to medieval the medieval castles and palaces that we looked at last time. And the first is sort of on the edge here. We do have what look like some defensive walls there. Now, one important thing to kind of be aware of here is it does not look like these, like we've got some walls here, some walls here, some walls there, but it looks like this one, it probably had a wall walk at some point, and it looks like these towers could be used for defense. But this wall is kind of entirely, you know, it's not surrounding the entire castle for defense like we saw with Dover Castle or some of the other early medieval castles we saw in Britain in the last lecture. Another thing to notice is that aside from the fact that this is much better repair than a lot of those castles, you're not seeing the really narrow windows, and this is probably due to the fact that there's not as much need for arrow slits and this kind of thing. So you're not seeing as much of that. Now, little difficult to observe here, but you are still seeing a little bit of crenellations there. So these crenellations are still present. You maybe see a bit of it there. It's a little difficult to see. But the crenellations are still there, even though a lot of the other defensive features are leaving. So the reason for this is that the crenellations eventually, instead of being defensive, they became ornamental. And proving that you could have a castle with crenellations was something that it was an expense in older castles, and it became sort of a display of wealth eventually as well. Now, another thing to notice here, you're starting to see spires everywhere on this castle. Now, this was not something that we saw a lot of. We saw, defensive towers, but not these real tall, imposing spires like you would see on cathedrals. So this is another sense in which and you probably saw this all throughout, but you're having these sort of ornamental spires be put on castles where before we kind of only saw them on cathedrals. Now, in this case, we are seeing that the castle is kind of situated a bit on a hill to give it sort of an advantageous position. So that's another sort of remnant of the defensive features. We'll take a close. So here's the second image of Eltz Castle, and I did want to show this one because you can kind of see these features. Some leftover ink there, but that are resembling crenellations. They're not completely crenellations, but they're kind of similar to it. You get a better view of both the windows and how they're more designed to let in light. They're not nearly as much defensive structures as they used to be, as well as the spires in this image. Okay, the next one, Hohenzollern, I believe is how you pronounce it. I liked this castle for a couple of reasons. One, it's got this very apparent position high atop a hill. And this would undoubtedly make it difficult to besiege. However, when you're this high up on a hill, it's getting to the point where the height is not so much a defensive advantage, although it probably could be. But being able to build it up on top of a hill is more a way to show off and a way to show how impressive the structure is. So that's kind of what we're seeing with this castle. And you're also seeing here, in a couple of different places, some very impressive crenellations. But it's unclear whether or not there's a wall walk associated with those crenellations. So at this point, these crenellations are becoming more like ornaments than they are like for defensive structures. You can see, again, we've got some very tall spires. They're starting to, get really large in the there's a fourth one there in the background. The windows are kind of narrow, but there are a lot of them, and some of them are not nearly as narrow. So again, these are starting to appear to be more ornamental and less defensive. Certainly not so much for arrow slits anymore. Taking another look at a different portion of this, we can see the very large crenellations, but then even some smaller crenellations. So again, the crenellation is starting to appear a bit more like an ornamental feature rather than a defensive feature. Now, these windows, again, they are kind of thin, but as you get a closer look at them, particularly here, and maybe even a bit here, you're kind of getting the sense that these are giving more of an impression of the kinds of windows you would see in a cathedral. Again, so starting to be significantly more ornamental. And again, this is built high up on a hill, and you can see the walls kind of anchored into the hill would make it very difficult to attack, but also just kind of imposing as well. So here's Schweren Castle. This one you can definitely see the tall spires, and even at this point you're getting kind of a taller tower that you're putting a taller spire on top of. Again, not so much a defensive structure, just something to be very impressive and imposing. Can see a bit of a crenellation there, and again, that wall doesn't have much of a wall walk. By this point, we're also seeing that there's not much in the way of city wall or castle walls in particular. It is kind of situated up on a hill, so that would make it a little bit more difficult to attack. But there's no walls surrounding it that are really gonna prevent that, or not nearly as imposing. So here's it from a different angle, and that may have been a bit of an overstatement because we can see some of the walls there, along with a bit of the crenellations on those walls. And it could be the case that this would be the easiest angle of approach, so that's why they walled that side as opposed to the other one. Nevertheless, with this one, we're still seeing the defensive function is not kind of what it used to be, but it is still there. And on this one, it's kind of interesting. We are getting the sense that down at the bottom of the hill, there is kind of a town, a more pleasant place to live. So it's possible that this castle did have a significantly more defensive purpose in mind, and that people would go back up into the castle when they were attacked. So that's definitely possible as well. Just another view of it, so you can see again the village down at the bottom, and then the castle itself sitting on top of the hill. Now this one I think is probably my favorite, Neuschwanstein. I believe that's how you pronounce it. If I pronounce it incorrectly, I apologize. But again, by this point, it seems clear that we're really going towards features that impress, not so much features that are defensive. It looks like we count the floors 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then a 6th if there's another floor up there. So this castle is now multiple stories, 6 stories of a castle that's built, on this very high steep terrain. We've got some very impressive towers, some spires, another tower there. This was the kind of castle that was clearly inspired by the Disney castle, or clearly inspired the Disney castle is what I meant to say, not inspired by. But again, the windows, not so much for defense. We don't see any wall walks or anything like that. The position could be considered a portion of its defense. Probably makes it more difficult to access, but again, by this point, putting it up in this location, it's getting it's more there to impress than it is to be a defensive strong point. And one of the interesting things we can see is looking at it from this angle, we can see, there's this wide open, kind of flat land off in the direction we're looking. But we start looking in other directions, and this one's backing up. I wanted to show this one because this thing it's really kind of perched right on the edge of the mountains. And again, you don't necessarily do that to have it be a defensive strong point. You do that kind of to prove you can. To prove you can build this really impressive structure on the edge of the mountains like this. Now, I'm not entirely certain that's why this was done, but that is certainly something that that happens. It's not like Dover Castle, where it was built on a hill, but definitely was designed to keep people from accessing that point. So it was designed as a defensive strong point. Another example, really like the view of the towers from this side, and you can kind of see you have a bit of a wall walk here, but again, more to to be impressive, so you could maybe take people up there and show them the view. Similar sorts of other things going on with the other castles. Here we can see possibly an addition, a later addition, but a very, lots of windows there to give people a view. Not so much with the defensive purpose. This is a very old image, and I believe this is one of the ways you would access it. So, to the extent that this is defensive, its location is its primary defense. It'd be very, very difficult to assault this area just because the ground around it is so steep. Now, Schweren Castle. Now, at this point, we're completely moving away from defensive structures. So this one has even more floors than Neuschwanstein. And we're getting to the point where, there's a lot of open windows. We've got a bunch of spires. We've even got, an ornamental dome here. Like I said, a bunch of spires, a lot of windows, but also just a lot of interior space so that this could become more of a building used for administration. Looking at it from another angle, one of the things we do retain is it's kind of on an island, so it's surrounded by a bit of a moat. So the defensive idea isn't completely gone. But notice we don't have any. We don't have much of a wall to speak of. Now, one of the interesting things I saw was right here. You can kind of see a wall with a wall walk there, but again, that's more. It seems more to be a nod to the way castles used to be built than a true defensive structure. I mean, I could be wrong about that, and it could be that this structure changed, but clearly, even if this structure was originally built for defense, it's clearly moved in the direction of being sort of a more functional building and a building that's meant to impress people. Now, this is Sansuki, I believe. I could be completely wrong with that pronunciation. But at this point, this is where we're starting to see not just an impressive building that, again, is almost completely devoid of defensive structures, but this entire compound around it, which is filled with gardens and fountains, and this is entirely a feature that's meant to just make the area look nice and make the area be inviting. And it's meant to impress for sure, but it's meant to be kind of a little more welcoming than what we saw in cathedrals, how they were meant to impress, but kind of meant to be imposing. So, meant to be a pleasant place to spend time, meant to, be a place where you go walk outside. And we're going to see this in a lot of these palaces going forward. So another angle of it, and you can see very wide open. The building itself, not a lot of floors, probably meant to be a little bit more functional. So you don't have to be constantly going upstairs. You could have a nice wide open house and be able to access the gardens and things like that. The Wurzburg Residents. Again, you're seeing a lot more of this. Now, this building is significantly bigger. So, few floors, but again, almost no defensive structures. So the expense is more spent on these gardens and these fountains and just sort of making the structure look impressive, but also making it inviting and in a place people would enjoy spending time. And also you can see the background. This is now in kind of the center of a city, so this is probably starting to become more more of an administrative center rather than a defensive and military center. Another view of that, really liked this view of the gardens. It's a panoramic shot, but you can see just sort of how big these gardens are, and you see some people there, just how sort of pleasant this space would be to spend some time in. And then there's a view of the main building, and like I was saying, you're now getting several stories of building, but again, this looks much more like an administrative building than a defensive structure. Now, I would say this one, all these structures up to this point have been in Germany. This one is in France. This one was built by the Sun King, and it's extremely impressive. And he built this structure to be his personal dwelling, but also be the seat of government in France. And you can see it's built in a way that kind of serves that purpose. It's outside of Paris, so was not in the city of Paris, but it's almost like a city in its own right. Like the complex itself, extended all the way back this way. Now this is clearly the main building with the gardens surrounding it, but even over here we've got this is clearly a planned out system where it's almost like a city. A palace is becoming a city in its own right. So looking at some of these, again, you can see, much like the Wurzburg Residents, it's a very impressive building, but it's looking very administrative with, some pleasant gardens and places to spend time outside when you exit the building, but also meant to impress guests that come and visit this place. The fountains and the statues just entirely meant to impress. You can see kind of a return to some of those old Greek forms. Those look like Ionic columns there. So again, meant to be very impressive. Meant to just kind of show off what the builder and the ruler of the country was capable of. The building itself also, it does inspire a little. It reminds you a bit of what we saw in the Roman period, but a lot more sort of ornate and a lot more. Definitely has influences of those castles. Like you can kind of see sort of the remnants of the parapet up there. Although this is clearly not for defense with all those statues and gargoyles and it's become more of a hand railing rather than a parapet with crenellations. The defensive structures are almost completely gone here, if not completely gone by this point. Just very, very expansive gardens all over this area. Clearly not designed for just a single person, maybe a single person with a huge ego, but these rooms are it was designed to run a government out of this building in this palace complex. And again, you can see the Ionic columns along with some statues that kind of give us remind us of classical statues. Another picture of the gardens, showing the bringing back of the Roman arches in the form of these windows. Again, just kind of mixing of a lot of the forms we've seen. And then lastly, another sort of angle on that to just see what you can see with the gardens. A lot of these are showing kind of the same thing, but just to give a sense of how expansive and how massive the Palace of Versailles was. So that's how you pronounce this. I don't remember if I said that, but this is the Palace of Versailles. Okay, so that is it for the observations of these castles and palaces. Hope you found this useful. Thank you, and I will see you next time.